something that we do here in Australia is we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. That's the people that lived here and still live here prior to colonialism. Where I am is Gadigal land, but there's people from all over the country on different lands, and of course all over the world on different lands. And I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and that sovereignty was never ceded. We're going through a rather awkward and arduous process at the moment with all sorts of smoke and mirrors, the Yalara statement from the heart and so on. But I won't go into too much of that detail. I'd just like to make that acknowledgement and we'll get started. Now, of course, we've got a lovely lineup of speakers, and our first speaker is Dr. Lisa Johnson. She is instrumental in the movement Doctors for Assange, which is a global movement of doctors and specialists calling for Julian Assange's rights and for his immediate release. And if you would like to welcome Lisa, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Well, look, we're here today, of course, to, by sort of lack of time zone, launch actions online around the world today to mark what was and is a very dark day for democracy. So today, April 11th in 2019, that was the day that an award-winning journalist and publisher was handed over to be tried as a spy by the United States journalist. So now, Julian Assange's life is at imminent risk in Belmarsh Prison due to coronavirus. And in Belmarsh, prisoners have started dying and medical experts are warning of explosive transmission of coronavirus in prisons. Yet, last month at an emergency bail hearing for Julian Assange, the magistrate overseeing his case denied the bail application. And that was despite hearing medical evidence that Julian Assange is vulnerable to the lethal effects of coronavirus, partly because of, and importantly, because of a chronic lung condition. And that decision to deny bail really flies in the face of an overwhelming medical, legal, and human rights consensus around the world that under the threat of COVID-19, prisoners who are medically vulnerable, just like Julian Assange, prisoners who are non-violent, like Julian Assange, and prisoners who are unsentenced and prisoners on remand should be released immediately for their own protection, because prisoners have human rights, they have the right to life and the right to health. Also just to stem the spread of the virus, because prisons are breeding grounds and people coming and going from prisons then also spread the virus. So rather than follow that consensus, what's happening is that Julian Assange is being excluded for release from the up to 4,000 UK prisoners who are scheduled to be released because of coronavirus. And to me, as a psychologist and as a member of Doctors for Assange, that represents three key things. And one is that the UK authorities are willing to let Julian Assange die in jail. The second thing is that this is the latest instalment in a long and escalating campaign of psychological torture of Julian Assange. So with coronavirus, ripping through prisons, he is being exposed to the threat of death from that and being rendered utterly helpless yet again in the face of threat, which has been a key technique and tactic of his psychological torture going back 10 years. And the other thing it represents to me is the latest instalment of a long and escalating campaign of medical abuse and neglect of Julian Assange, which is what Doctors for Assange have been writing to governments about since November last year. And the doctors now are at 200, either nearly or just over 200 doctors and psychologists. And we've been writing since November that as a result of Julian Assange's prolonged psychological torture and medical neglect that dates back a long way in the Ecuadorian Embassy, his life was already at risk before the outbreak of coronavirus. And of course, that risk is intensified and more urgent now. And as long ago as 2015, doctors were warning governments that if Julian Assange didn't receive safe passage to hospital soon, anything worse than a trivial illness could put his life at risk. And coronavirus is, of course, far worse than a trivial illness. It's lethal to people who are medically vulnerable, like Julian Assange. So, you know, given that in prisons, social distancing is impossible, the hygiene necessary to protect oneself from coronavirus is impossible, placing Julian Assange in harm's way from coronavirus by leaving him in prison is the psychological and medical equivalent of tying him to railroad tracks in front of an oncoming train. And why is this happening? It's happening because the United States, and it seems the UK, are hell-bent on redefining journalism as espionage, using Julian Assange as a test case and a chilling example. So just yesterday, I believe, Julian Assange managed to get a message out to the world via his friend Vaughan Smith. And to me, it was a cry for help from the railroad tracks. And he said that the deaths in Belmarsh Prison from coronavirus are more numerous than authorities are letting on. He said that coronavirus is ripping through the Belmarsh. He said that over 150 staff are self-isolating and that the prison is barely functioning. And he said that he's in solitary confinement essentially for 23.5 hours a day. And for the other half hour, it's exercise in a crowded environment, which of course is the opposite of what's needed to protect prisoners from coronavirus. And he also said that he thinks that pressing ahead with his extradition hearing next month in light of COVID-19 is an effort to undermine him legally because he can't meet with his lawyers, he can't give them instructions. So yet again, being rendered utterly helpless. So as we digest that very alarming message from Julian Assange, it's worth remembering who and what he has on his side, you know, calling for his freedom, not just for bail, you know, not just calling for bail in light of coronavirus, but also calling for his freedom from the extradition proceedings themselves, because journalism is not, at least not yet, a crime. So in his corner, Julian Assange has Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which oversees the European Court of Human Rights, is considered the guardian of democracy in Europe. He has the International Observatory for Human Rights, of course, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, the UN Rapporteur on Torture, the UN Torture Mandate, Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, essentially the full weight of the International Legal and Human Rights Committee. And here in Australia, he has the Journalists Union, Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, New South Wales Council for Civil Liberties, and also yesterday, I believe, a cross-party parliamentary group of Australian politicians has written to the UK government urging them to release Julian Assange on bail in line with the legal and human rights consensus, and stressing that he's convicted of nothing and that he is therefore innocent in the eyes of the law and should be released. And even more than that, he's being arbitrarily detained. In May last year, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention announced that Julian Assange's incarceration in Belmarsh constitutes ongoing deprivation of liberty. In other words, it's an illegitimate imprisonment. He's a political prisoner. So as citizens, we really must add our voices to this international legal and human rights consensus and to the voices of Australian politicians and those calling for the humanitarian release of prisoners. And write to our governments, our elected officials, call them, write and call again, and let them know that we are not happy to murder a journalist for telling us the truth. And we are not happy to redefine journalism as espionage. And we are not happy to treat journalists as spies, because we know what kinds of governments do that to their journalists, and they're not governments that treat their citizens well. So what we need to do is we need to fight like our lives and our societies depend on it to free Julian Assange. Thank you. Over to you, Ian.
So Alex Hills is the main coordinator for Candles for Assange, which kicked off in New Zealand and has moved around the world. Sorry, I'm reading at the same time as speaking. Yes, so I'd like everybody to welcome Alex, and she can give us a bit of an update on what's going on.
G'day, Alex.
Hey, how's everybody? Yeah, so I had kind of prepared a sort of speechy sort of thing, but I'm not sure if that's appropriate. But I mean, I could first of all say what's been happening with candles anyway for the last sort of 9 months. Probably most people know we tried to list birthday events on 3rd of July, and we got about 62 cities in the end. I think it was on the day. We're incredibly proud of just the participation, even though some of those events were just one person at a war memorial, or on, you know, someone lighting a candle even in their own space. And so we were just bewildered with just the response, and it showed that there's a lot of support out there. And so since then, a wonderful person called Patrick on the ground in Berlin has suggested the weekly vigils. I think he saw what was going on with New York with their weekly vigils straight after the arrest, and was inspired to do the same thing, because I guess you can build up an audience from one person and just keep going, and then you get the consistency. And I think it really worked, especially the sites that were doing weekly protests. And after that, Mexico and London and many European cities joined, to the point where we had 25 cities doing regular protests just before this all got shut down with CV. So now what we've been trying to do, respecting the wishes of WikiLeaks and Christine, that we do not encourage group protests anymore. We've had 2 schemes going for the last few days. Patrick has been organising a solo vigil idea, and he's publishing lots of beautiful photos of people behind bars with their signs, doing a solo vigil, obeying the rules. And the other thing we've been doing is using the roster that was the almost 50 cities that were sort of running weekly events by the end. We're asking people if they can use that day to ring and email and write and do what they can. So that's kind of the background of candles. I've also, I guess I got inspired at the beginning, around about when Unity 4J came on board, to really start pushing the New Zealand protests. And pretty straight off, we did an emergency petition, which actually was Julian's 47th birthday when we decided to do that. And so, yeah, we've been working really hard in New Zealand. Got some support here with Craig Tuck, who'll be on our live stream tonight. We're going to have a few people. We're doing an open Zoom. I've only sent it to trusted people, the link, but I'm now a bit concerned about how that's going to go. But yeah, so tonight at 7 o'clock GMT, so UTC +12 for people who aren't in Australia or New Zealand, and that's hard to figure out. At 7 p.m. we'll have Craig Tuck, we'll have Commander X tonight, we'll have Patrick from Germany, we'll have Nat from Mexico, and the Auckland girls, Fiona and Charlene, who do all the protests in Auckland, and hopefully a few more people that will surprise us and come on board. But I'm probably going to just email the people that I want to participate at this point. But any of you, of course, if you want to join us tonight, you're most welcome. In terms of what I wanted to say about what's happening to Julian right now, I mean, obviously, like everyone, I'm hearing what Deepa Driver said on that interview on Consortium News about Assange being ill. It's the worst of our fears, and it's what we have been banging on about really heavily for a while now. And I mean, it took us thousands of years and a number of civilizations to stop and start for us to build the right to free speech. And here we are, we've completely eroded it in the space of, you know, a year or so. We've gone from censorship and algorithm bubbles and silos, and we're now at a point where we are being crucified with the censorship, and it's only just got worse with CV. A number of people are being demonetized. Obviously censorship we're already suffering here with this online stream and people spamming it. There's all sorts of ways that this seems to be occurring. I mean, I'm from London originally. I was born there. I was there till I was about 8, and then I went back to uni there when I was 17. And so I feel particularly aggrieved at how the UK justice system is treating Assange. I mean, to be the place where the Magna Carta was formed, to be the place where, you know, international laws were set down in the world wars, and we're just sort of trampling over all of them right now. It's incredible, and so something's got to give, really, at this point. I think one of the saving graces that we have is that as we are all in our algorithm silos, it might be that we're preaching to the converted somewhat. But what also is happening is I think the establishment are in their own silo, their own algorithm silo. And one of my feelings is that they are becoming increasingly out of touch with what the people actually think because of those silos too. So they're also being censored, and their little bubble, their little silo is getting smaller and smaller, and people are leaving mainstream media in droves. I guess one of the problems with CV is now, if you say anything against your government, you're kind of branded as someone who doesn't believe in what's going on, or doesn't think that people are getting sick, or whatever harm that they want to attach to you. And that's a worry, because this is really shutting down dissent, and it's really shutting down, again, people being encouraged to report on each other, neighbours. You know, here in New Zealand, we've had a lockdown from the beginning. We've only lost one person to COVID. And we closed our borders really early. We went to full lockdown almost straight away as soon as it became an issue. And I suppose that seems to have worked to some extent for us. But at the same time, you know, we've got neighbours reporting on each other. We've got people who are trying to just, you know, be friendly to people who are very lonely, walking past on the street, and, you know, have a wine on your driveway and keep to the rules. And they're even, you know, reporting on you for that, calling sound control because people are trying to dance in their driveways. People are trying to make the best of it, and it's a bit of a shame to see, you know, this shutting down and this desire to nanny over other people's, and nanny trolls coming out. So, and I guess other things that I'm concerned about in the censorship arena is also the disinformation. I mean, obviously the establishment always point to, you know, social media and small media players for the disinformation, but we all know that it's going to come from the MSM first, really. And even something like Q, I think, is just a reaction to the toxic behaviour in America, particularly, that's going on online, and something had to counteract the complete bias in the MSM against Trump. And so you have QAnon, probably run by Trump, which is telling people to sit back and trust the plan, you know, that Julian will be pardoned. And I think this is ridiculous. I mean, all of them probably should review Cassandra Fairbanks' recent video. And I've uploaded it to my channel, Alex Hills, as well. You know, it blows out of the water any notion that Trump was going to pardon Assange, and it shows that not only was he spying horrendously on this on the embassy when he was there, but that he made the order with Ecuador, and you know, this is not coming from somewhere else, it's coming from Trump. So I think there's a bit of delusion there, and I think that's on purpose. That helps the whole censorship drive, because you've got people sitting back and trusting the plan. Yeah, so that's really all I had to say in terms of my my influence. Is anyone there?
Yes, thank you, Alex. We're all on mute.
Okay, so that's kind of where I'm at the moment with what's happened. And I'm really happy to answer questions if I can help anyone or connect anyone with people that are trying to work all around the world. I mean, one thing that's really been wonderful with Candles is just to see how much hardworking single individuals there are all around the world doing this, and we're all a community, and we all back each other up, and we all promote each other's stuff, and I think that's the way forward.
Nice one. Andrew Zygmunt Smith, he's from the US and a group called Action for Assange. They have regular weekly vigils as well as other actions. And really, they're holding up the end in the US to a large part, because there must be a tough job. So I'd like everybody to welcome Andrew. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to say it's such an honor to be here and in this space with you guys right now, for the start of this, and this being the first of many events around the world. I could trace my story following WikiLeaks all the way back to the release of the collateral murder videos, and how that was the thing that really shook me awake, I guess, as a 19 or 20-year-old, seeing what my government was doing in my name and with my money. But the big thing is when Julian was taken to jail a year ago, it just it flipped a switch, I guess. And it was a Wednesday or a Thursday, and that Friday I left for Washington, D.C. right after work at about 5 o'clock. And after the 8.5 hour drive there, I got to the British consulate, and the protests had already resided for the day. But I spent that night thinking. I actually slept in my car in a parking lot somewhere in a just random place in DC. And the next day, the protests had actually moved on from the British consulate to New York City with the Free Assange group, and I believe Code Pink up there. And I didn't have like the means to get up to New York, so I just spent the day walking and driving around DC, looking at the sites, reflecting on the symbolism of the city, so to speak. And that's when I had just finally realized that, especially in this world, not everybody has the means to just throw everything down and go to a major city and join a protest. And that's really where the idea of Actions for Assange got started. And the goal was to inspire people to simply do what they can with the time and the money and the resources that they have. And the hope was that we could slowly start to see and make Action for Assange like the smallest fish in a pond of content creators and individuals sharing their actions and their events. And we actually connected really early on with Alex, which was awesome, being able to partner with Candles for Assange. But it was around the middle of May, I think, that the Unity for J vigils stopped because of issues in Susie's personal life and things around there. And so I had sent a message out to Christine asking, hey, would it be okay? Like, could we start doing vigils to pick up not where Unity for J left off, but just as a new chapter, as like a whole new thing. And we were lucky enough that she had said yes. And so we had got Christy Doff and Steve Poikinen and then Taylor Hudak involved. And we just literally started running with it. When we first launched the show, we didn't have we didn't even have a format. We had no idea what we were doing. It was just really off the cuff from one thing to the next. But over these last couple months, we managed to actually raise about $5,000 to hold the U.S. protest in Washington, D.C. during Julian's first round of extradition hearings. And it was just a really inspiring thing because that was about a week before the world went into lockdown. As everything, the end of February was literally what I would say was the last free week of the human race at this point, unless we can make dramatic changes to fix it. So what the big thing here is that Julian asked us to be his voice. It's come out in multiple letters, it's come out in pictures, and that's really something that I hope every individual can pick up and start doing. Because in the US, we see protests across the country right now, just with the general strikes and things like that. And a lot of them involve vehicles where people will get in their car, they'll put a banner on the side of it, and they'll drive slowly through a community honking their horn because everybody's home right now. So people come out, they see what the message is, and it's a great way to keep distant to make sure you and your loved ones can't run the risk of contamination. And just getting out and doing literally what you can. Like with people in the UK, they're allowed to go out one time a day to do exercise or grocery shopping or what have you. So the half joke, half seriousness that I always say is, well, make your exercise putting up posters as you're walking down the street for that one time you're allowed out. Because then when the next person comes out to go walking, they'll see those and it makes it part of their world then. Because in the United Kingdom, they went from having a 10,000 person protest to having not even the ability to assemble more than 3 people and with no one outside of your house. So the big thing here now, like in this time and space, is just encouraging everyone to find a way to be that one person protest for Julian. Whether it's driving in a car with a banner on the side and honking your horn, whether it's putting up posters, whether it's going around and putting a flyer with your phone number in it in your neighbor's door saying, hey, if you need food or medicine, give me a call, and then leaving a blurb about Julian Assange on the same letter. Because we've learned a lot of new words in these last couple months, social distancing, flattening the curve, things like that. But really what is happening to some extent is the removal of community, where they don't want people coming together, literally, whether it's for a protest, whether it's for shopping, whether it's for religious events or holidays. The goal is people need to stay apart. And so the thing that I tell people and try to encourage them is don't say social distancing, say physical distancing, because we still need community now more than ever. It just has to be 10 to 12 feet apart. So I really hope that people can just kind of look at the world and find the way, and most of us probably already do this, but to be the one crazy person in your town that's willing to go out and put up the posters for the hour a day that you're allowed out of solitary confinement. Because before this, everyone was saying, and very truly, that they're not after Julian, they're after us, and he was just in the way. And with the whole world now in lockdown while Julian's in Belmarsh, that couldn't be more true. So the thing that I really think about is, what would Julian be telling us about the coronavirus? What would that one tweet be that he would put out from the embassy to make the whole world shake and make them cut his internet and literally have to go into emergency management mode because this one man said one thing and brought the world to its knees for an hour and a half while they tried to figure out how to manage it and shifted the perception for the next 10 months going forward until the next crisis they can try to invent. So I just hope that everyone can do what they can with the time and money and resources and connections that they have, because there's no greater time to build a community, especially centered around values of truth and honesty and free speech.
Thank you, Andrew. That was really insightful. One of the things that we have a problem with here in our version of response to COVID-19 is most of, in Sydney anyway, our campaigning is when we're not putting up posters in the street. What we are doing is putting up banners on our houses and on our vehicles, because they're legitimately allowed out and about. Australia is in the position of being now number 26 most reported infections of COVID-19, and I've done some samples of various postcodes, and nearly everybody is going down. You know, there's been no reported cases in my neighbourhood, for example, for a week, though 2 weeks ago there were 45 just in my suburb. So it's making quite a difference, this version of lockdown that we're using. So one of the interesting things I find about COVID-19, and I'm sorry I'm sort of derailing the conversation a little bit there, but it is actually giving us an opportunity to campaign on the society that we want after the plague. Almost after all plagues throughout history in the last 1,000 years or whatever, we've noticed that society has had massive change after it comes out. So it's going to be up to us whether it's a corporatocracy or whether it is a more egalitarian society. And I think that, you know, that there is a greater movement. Our unions in Australia are getting sign-ups at a record level. There is massive change. People are waking up and realising that the essential services are those that are either called unskilled or low wage, like cleaners and nurses and so on. And there is no need for billionaires. And so we really need to be starting to talk about that sort of stuff. But back to Julian and what Julian would be doing with, if he was free to speak. To be honest with you, it's a matter of what WikiLeaks is sent as to what they deliver. Kristen Herafsnison is still the editor-in-chief, and the documents that they're releasing are all very well worthy, but there isn't really much as far as from what I've seen anyway, for COVID-19, like where it's really come from. I mean, some people think it came out of the US, dumping it in Wuhan. Some people think it's the Chinese version of biological warfare. It could be all of these things. And I don't think we need to so much be distracted with where it comes from, but how we deal with it and what we do. Actually, I suppose I'd like to ask Lisa if she's got any thoughts on it, being a doctor and stuff.
On social aspects of COVID? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
I do, yes, yeah. And I also wonder what Julian would say about it, but I don't, you know, I figure I don't know, because he would always be more insightful about things than I could be off the top of my own head. But I agree with Andrew, actually. I mean, I used the term social distancing when I was speaking, but I don't like that term at all for the same reasons. I agree. We should be careful about that kind of terminology, and physical distancing is much better. I mean, I wish there had been a medically driven response to COVID-19 rather than this social control, effective martial law, global police state response. You know, in the countries that did mass testing and isolated in a targeted way did much, much better than those of us who've just gone for this mass lockdown. There was a great interview with John Pilger on Going Underground. He talked about the fact that there's been modelling before this about what would happen in Britain if a pandemic like this hit Britain. I think it was only 4 years ago that modelling was done, and they found that there weren't enough ventilators, that hospitals would be overwhelmed, that it would be an utter disaster, that medically they wouldn't be able to cope. So what did they do? They buried the report rather than learn from it and prepare for the pandemic that they knew was coming at some point. So there's lots of gross failures of leadership that are related to corporatocracy and neoliberalism. You know, John Pilger's tying that to the privatisation of the NHS. You know, the fact that in the US there's a private company that was given a whole lot of money apparently to make affordable ventilators, and instead they made a really expensive version. They took the money, they never delivered to the public what they were supposed to deliver, and again there's this problem with ventilators. And I mean, apparently Kerala, a state in India, did mass testing and they dealt with the virus much better than we have, and I believe Iran has as well. So countries that are under sanction, that are impoverished, are doing better than the wealthiest countries in the world because they've invested more in healthcare and publicly funded services and so on. So I agree with you, Ian. Hopefully these are real messages that will come out of this. I mean, the thing that worries me is the disaster capitalism, crisis capitalism aspect of it, where, you know, naturally occurring disasters or other, you know, catastrophic events like 9/11 are seized upon to enact policies that people wouldn't accept at any other time. And there's truckloads of literature that when people are frightened, they will accept all sorts of deprivation of liberty and authoritarian policies that they wouldn't accept at other times. There's a big literature about that in psychology. So I'm hopeful, like you're saying, that something new will emerge afterwards and people's eyes will open more to just how harmful and, you know, ineffective corporatism is. But on the other hand, I'm concerned that these rights and freedoms that are being rolled back now they won't be given back to us. I mean, they weren't after 9/11. You know, the Patriot Act remained in place, the habeas corpus never was returned, that kind of stuff. So I mean, it's worrying, but I mean, if we've got our eyes open, hopefully there'll be enough people who have their eyes open and their eyes are opened even further that you know, that there will be change afterwards. I mean, the other thing that concerns me, I think you were talking about this, Alex, is just some subtleties of the mindsets that people are in, kind of people being policing right action with each other, whether people are keeping enough social distance, whether they're, you know, breaking lockdown laws. And of course, you know, the virus is real and we need to try to contain it as much as possible. And in the absence of a medically driven response, you know, this is what we unfortunately need to do. But I think individually people need to be careful about these subtle social changes that are happening, treating each other as contaminated and contaminating. I really don't like that. That's just the, you know, over months that could seep in quite subtly to how we relate to each other, you know, and everybody, because people are frightened for, I mean, most people know someone who's vulnerable, somebody old, somebody with diabetes, somebody with respiratory issues. So everybody feels very, you know, it's a very personal, very real, very there's a potential grief, and also people who've lost people, thinking about losing more people. Grief, fear is all tied up in it. So the emotion behind people sort of policing each other is very real and very strong. But I'm concerned about long term, the kind of social rewiring that might happen. So I think we just agree with Andrew and Alex. We need to be careful about that and vigilant about that.
Thank you, Lisa. That was massive insights. Does anybody else have any questions or something they'd like to say? Just put your hand up and we can unmute you. Fantastic. I didn't see whether that was Simon or...
Yeah, well, sorry, I was, but there might be somebody else, so I'm happy to wait.
Jacob will be next.
Oh,
after Simon.
Oh, sorry.
After me. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something Lisa mentioned at the start, and also that Julian Assange has been emphasising, especially lately, which is the importance, above all else, of contacting our political representatives. And people have often emphasised this, but I think there's a lot more that can be done to make it happen at scale than just calling for people to do it or individually responding to that call. So when you want to win a war, for instance, you don't say, hey, everybody, go and fight the other side. You organise a system to make that happen most efficiently. And I think we can do that. I think what we need is an army of people contacting their federal representatives and recruiting others to do the same. And it shouldn't be hard, for instance, to set up a website and an associated Twitter account to provide support and guidance at an international level, and then have national, state, and local coordinators. I think some kind of structured resource can help to provide a scaling factor. So as people get involved and get help that they need, get inspired and get assistance and so on, and then they can provide that help to others in turn. So it's a synergistic effect, and it's an efficient use of resources and inspiring material, etc. And there can also be targets and tracking of progress. So what members have been contacted by this initiative. Where do we need more impact and so on. So it's a way to focus and intelligently direct people's energies. Okay, so I just wanted to put that out there. It's not entirely my initiative either. It's Bob Carr, Australia's foreign minister at the time that Julian went into the embassy, as a matter of fact, raised this idea with some specific details only about a month ago. So it's quite curious, actually. He's a supporter of Assange, and a strong supporter now, and he was before he became foreign minister. He just had this little lapse in the middle while he was foreign minister, and he could have done something very significant to help. But in any case, his idea, this came out before the virus, unfortunately, but his idea was to get groups of 12 people to personally meet on one occasion with a local representative and to just unravel the misapprehensions that have been absorbed by our political representatives by the media. For instance, just tell them Assange, that the WikiLeaks revelations had no fatalities, and that everything else that people have heard to make them unsupportive or unsympathetic about Assange is completely irrelevant to this case, which is central to press freedom. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. It is very, very efficient. Instead of railing on Twitter constantly and talking to each other, we can actually get to the people who make decisions, because they're not listening to us. They're not watching this. They're in a world, and that another very important thing about this is they're not directly leaned on in a way that our leaders are. as in our prime ministers and our foreign ministers. They've got direct pressure from the empire, basically. But members of parliament, they're just going along for the ride. They're watching the TV. They're looking at their constituents. If their constituents start to pressure them, then that comes back onto the leadership and things can really happen. So we've got parliamentary groups started up. That's great, but we can move this forward a lot more effectively, I think. And unfortunately, the virus hit, so we can't do meetings in person at the moment. But there's a lot of other things we can do, even just writing letters. The thing is, people here contact the representatives and they're shy and they don't have experience of how to do that. Some people do, they go ahead and do it. But if there was, as I said, structured resources, support, a place where they can join, go back to, get notifications, I think this could really become a snowballing thing. So anyway, some people don't know my background, so I'll just mention I'm a philosopher in Australia. I've been a long-term supporter of WikiLeaks since I was a volunteer with them in 2007. I've written an open letter recently to Scott Morrison about this persecution of Assange, and it's got some impressive signatures, dozens of law professors and journalists and barristers, Daniel Ellsberg, etc. So, and I've talked to this and had some good feedback from other people as well. And I don't particularly want to be a campaigner, but I do want to help organise something like this. And I'm sure there are a lot of organisers out there sitting at home and are concerned about Assange and are on Twitter all day, that would be keen to get on and maybe work on something like this. So I'll just put out my email address for you. Is my name, Simon Floth, Floth @hotmail.com, and I'll just let others go on from here. If you want to take that up, I'd be glad to hear from you. And back to Ian for now.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you for the generous offer of sharing your email to us all there. And I'm sure there'll be quite a few of us in touch with you to see what we can do on the next steps. Over to Jacob as the next person.
Yeah, thanks for that, and thanks, Simon. And Simon, can I just ask, maybe put your email address in the chat, man, in the chat box. Look, I reckon that's a great idea, but I do have to come out and say I have absolutely no faith in our parliamentary process as such. But that's not saying it's not something that needs to be worked on. Our down here, what I've been working on for years is being out on the street and organising street activities. And so I just thought I'd give you an update. People, I don't know if people would have noticed from the screen, I've been a little bit distracted by the phone. We've just had an update of what happened yesterday. We had and it was about a refugee protest, but I think it's germane to how the police are going to be treating protests in future, at least down here. And I don't think New South Wales is going to be far behind. We had a car protest to a hotel where refugees are being detained yesterday. There were probably, I don't know, 3 dozen cars. Yeah, 3 dozen cars. The bloke who organised it, Chris, we never saw him. We assumed he was hassled and pulled out. But it turns out we've just got message. He was released from prison, from the lockup. The police arrived at his home 2 hours before the protest started, arrested him, confiscated his computer, his telephone, his paperwork, his teenage son's, 15-year-old son's computer, and they've charged him not under any of the emergency powers, but under the 1958 Crimes Act, under incitement. Now I've been organising, as some people would know on this line, protests and actions in Melbourne for 20 years and all over the country before that. And I've never come across an incitement charge for a protest organiser in Victoria up until now. It just hasn't happened. Even with huge things that actually did go pear-shaped. They've not done us with incitement. This is a new thing, and it actually shows that what they're doing is stopping people's right to protest. It's not just about the social distancing laws. They came into his house, 6 coppers in his lounge room, and none of them social distancing, I think is the term people are doing. They had him in a police car with 3 other coppers. They had him in a police cell with other people. Social distancing or concern about coronavirus was not on the agenda. It was purely about stopping the right to protest. And the interesting thing about the protest yesterday was the coppers, as they pulled over the cars, most people copped their fines and went away. Might surprise people to learn that we didn't do that. Most of the coppers who were talking to us seemed to be genuinely concerned that they were being used to do this. Like the coppers were pleading with me saying, and I got it on film saying, mate, I know, I agree with you, but we have to do this, you know? One copper, as we were finally going away after everybody else was free to go, we said that we'd be the last to leave. We were staying until everybody else was free to go. At the end, he sort of thanked us for being so vigilant about things, you know? And there were almost tears in his bloody eyes as we were leaving. But this is a way. We were planning on a big protest in the very near future. I'm not going to say too much on Zoom. A car rally for Julian and other things for a range of issues, including Julian, a range of demands. I haven't had time to do too much organising while I've been on Zoom here, but we're thinking that we're going to go ahead with that. And so, yeah, just be aware that this is like the next stage. We've never had this happen before. I just see, Kathy, you've written the Crimes Act from 1914. I think that's the Federal Crimes Act, or maybe the New South Wales one. The charge he was made was in the Victorian Crimes Act, which is a 58 Act. Anyway, that's it. We'll keep going. I mean, we'll support other types of initiatives like the parliamentary ones, etc. But we're still going to keep going on the streets and come what may.
Thanks, Jacob. It'd be interesting to hear what happens with the incitement charge, how that pans out. And you're absolutely right. This is the turning point as to what happens post COVID-19 and post capitalism. Really, what that society will be. The real problem is it's the disaster capitalists or the vulture capitalists, the crisis capitalists. Just how much they're keen on profiteering. You know, we can see the big difference with how the world responded to the ozone layer being depleted. That wasn't a profitable thing, so we fixed it straight away within the decade. Whereas the greenhouse gases and what have you are something that the vulture capitalists want to profiteer off. Did anybody else have any other questions or comments to add? Alex, I'll unmute you. I can't unmute you. I'll see if I can get Kathy to unmute you. Kathy, can you unmute Alex? Hang on a second.
Oh, thank you. That's it. I just wanted to say, after Simon Floth's suggestion here, which I've also been banging on about, given that we've lost our power to protest at the moment, and hopefully it's not forever, but as we suspect. But I just wanted to note that those emails that Australians for Assange have been auto-sending out are wonderful, but I have noticed, and I've been sending them on the basis of being British, Australian and Kiwi, so I have got a wide experience of responses from those. And I can tell you that some, like the NHS letters, they're not getting through because they are the same letter. And so one of the problems with these formats that we're using are that, you know, they're saying that only 1 in 6 gets sent if they're repeat messages, or or they're not sent at all or not considered. And of course, because everyone's responding to COVID at the moment, the complaints departments and the response departments, they're all closed. They're not actually, you know, actually receiving these things anyway. The other thing was that if we wanted to seriously annoy and get this message into our local MPs, my thought is that we should set up a schedule. If we can't organise the groups, in some places it's really hard to get a meeting with your MP. I was actually given a trespass order threat from my local MP just for trying to set up a meeting that actually he called twice now. And so that was quite frustrating for me. But what I wonder is if someone has the technical know-how as to how to make a schedule and have a series of focused attacks on a particular MP and literally fill up their daily schedule with a call every hour, and a letter, suggested ways to change it, a cut and paste, use a bit of this, use a bit of that, so that we can vary up the letters so that we don't always respond with these form letters, which aren't so much working. And you know, that's possibly one of the ways we can activate that. The other thing is, while we're not protesting all these groups around the world, if we did have what Simon's suggesting and some kind of organized structure where people feel like they're standing up and being counted and they're one of the people who's scheduled to do it at this hour or this day, you know, I feel like people will buy into that more because they feel like part of a community. They're all doing it together. And you know, you might say to yourself, oh yeah, I'll call next Wednesday, but do you do it unless you've actually got something really strong and you know, set up? So, oh, here's an email notification reminder, you've got to contact your MP today, that sort of thing. That kind of setup would be really, really valuable. And I also wanted to say thank you, Jacob and Rain there, for all what you've done in Melbourne, like all the events and you know, putting yourself at risk. I've seen such great work coming out of you guys there, and I really hope that this is not the end of that kind of action. Here in New Zealand, we are incredibly subservient and we obey the rules, and this is why we've got this kind of atmosphere of people dobbing in on each other and crazy, you know, people trying to make the most of it and kind of getting attacked for what they do. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say, is that in part of that, making that system that works, I think we have to acknowledge those two problems, the form letters and a way of really getting people to call at certain times that can help with that. And then once those people all connect with each other from a local area, hopefully they can all go to that MP together, or even people can travel from further away to go to that MP together, like suggested. So yeah, that's all really.
Thank you, Alex. Danny is our next person who's got their hand up. And I'll get, unfortunately, I've got to get Kathy to unmute you.
I'll do that.
Kathy, can you unmute Danny?
Can you hear me?
Just.
Yep.
Oh yeah, Kathy, maybe.
We can hear you, Danny.
Okay, sorry. I think what Simon said is a great idea, and I just want to say that I also believe that we've got to go a bit old school as well. So I think my experience is that I've actually contacted a member of Parliament, and this was, it took a long time, honestly, till I got an answer. I went to their office 5 times, and then I had obviously hassled them so much that it was the first week of COVID-19 lockdown and their office was closed. And I actually got a phone call from the member. For 15 minutes, I spoke with the member. I don't know if I'm being played or not, but I feel like there's a crack. I think, and I'm working on the crack. So I've developed what you know, I don't know if it's in my head, but I actually have some sort of relationship with her assistant now. And every day I send an update, like literally I take the news from the day and I put it all in an email, and I always get a reply. And the best reply was 2 days ago or 3 days ago, where the assistant told me that they're now forwarding them to one of the senators.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's 2 people, and there's with the if it's a big sort of like campaign and people are attacking the ministers. They might go into that resist thing. Whereas if you kind of have just play the little suburban housewife, you know, I'm concerned about an Australian journalist who's an innocent man. If it's not as militant, it may have more of an effect if we're just coming from that and appealing to however you as your personality finds, you know, a relationship with a person, like you work there, it may have more of an impact.
Yes, Danielle's experience has definitely cracked open the door for that particular MP. And
I hope so, yeah.
Oh, well, much better than my MP. Several of us have had several tilts at them, and they are just being totally obstructionist and head in the sand.
Can I also just say this? So, I mean, on this first anniversary, I mean, the only positive thing to come out of this is that when I count the squares here, there's 9 people in this group that I met via this event. And like, I'm grateful for that, because Julian Assange stands obviously for more than, you know, like the whole thing is that we're fighting for Julian, but really we should be doing Julian's work. We should be going on with the transparency and all of that, regardless of whether he was in custody, in prison or not. We should, and we all have to continue that. And so having the chance to meet all of you because of this hideous event, I think is a positive, and we've all got to, I don't know, just do more of what his work would be. So, I mean, if anyone is working in an area where they would need to expose anything, getting the courage to do that would be amazing. Encouraging other people, you know, I mean, truth is his thing, and I think we've just got to, the more we spread that, we spread, you know, the ripple of Julian Assange is just going out everywhere, and maybe that will also change minds and get more people on board for, you know, trying to get him free.
Something I should mention for our overseas participants, our federal and New South Wales state governments have closed down, which is quite an odd thing to do in such a time of crisis. But what this does do, it does leave our parliamentarians with a bit of extra time on their hands for us to approach them. I think Alex's suggestion of back-to-back meetings for Assange at various MPs, it might be an idea to, following Danielle's cue, which is to be very, very polite and, you know, try and attract the MP by not calling them a useless shithead, because that's what they are, but by actually saying, well, look, have you looked at this? This is really in your interest. We could maybe do a bit more of follow-up, get a few more people onto that particular MP's radar, so they don't just hear from Danielle, but they hear from various other people in their electorate. In a sense, we've got to target our personal electorates rather than all of them in this sort of intimate way. So I think that's a bit of a strong take-home action there for us all to do, just about wherever we are in the world, really, just to be writing to our MPs, alerting them to the fact that no lives were put in danger or lost, alerting them to the fact that just the course of events of what's really going on and what they need to be doing as your elected representative. Also, Simon, I'm pretty excited by your ideas there of strategy. I should make a clarification that's come through as a message. There's a big difference between Australians for Assange and the Australian Assange campaign. It's the Australian Assange campaign that is doing all the form emails for people to write to their local representative or international representative, depending on what's going on. So it's really the Australian Assange campaign that we want to be taking their resources from and sharing and so on, because they're the ones that are actually doing the heavy lifting on this. So, but yeah, back to Simon's idea. I think that's a great idea, and I think that's the sort of thing that would pair in with Alex's idea of blitzing them. I mean, we don't want to knock them completely out, but we want to make it so that their appointments book, even if it is only via the phone or via Zoom, is really taken up with this issue until they get to the point where they've just really got to do something about it, because it's now highest on their radar. It's more than any other of the social or environmental justice issues that people are always contacting them about. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to contribute? Andrew, we'll just get Kathy to unmute you.
Oh, I'm already unmuted. So the other day we had David McBride on the Free Assange Vigil, and I don't know if people are intimately aware with his story or not, but he's an Australian whistleblower that is facing punishment out there right now for revealing, like, basically the way the Australian government was using the wars that Julian exposed as political stunts for re-elections and political campaigns and things like that. The way to rally the country, essentially, as they were allowing Australians to die and killing civilians. And he could use as much support, and even if it's just sending him a message on Twitter and saying thank you. I know this isn't inherently related to Julian, but it's something that, after having like a 2-hour long conversation with him the other day, he's really just in need of people right now to connect with him, to tell him, like, hey, you're not alone in this fight. Because he's even, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but there's a whistleblower in the Australian Parliament who, former whistleblower, I believe,
Andrew Wilkie.
Yes, Wilkie. And Wilkie contacted him and said, hey, like, I support you, but this isn't something that I can bring up. And I believe that David is still facing charges right now and could potentially face years in prison for what he exposed. So if you could just literally message him on Twitter and say, hey, like, I appreciate you, like, thank you for what you've done. And if you have time, just talk with him, because I'm not local, like, I'm from the US, but he's someone that, after talking with him, his story just really touched me, and the way and like the compassion and the reasons why he did what he did. And then one other thing that kind of involves truth telling and alternative media, and love him or hate him, think he's crazy or not, but David Icke did a piece on the coronavirus with London Live. And he's a bit of a nut. He blames the coronavirus on 5G and all this other stuff, but the point that he makes that I feel like can be echoed even through Julian's case is driving home the idea of, what are we doing right now, like, as individual people? The world's falling into global tyranny. We can all see it. And his literal words were, as a parent or a grandparent, will you be able to look your kids in the eye and say, well, I sat on the couch and watched the news while everything rolled out? And that was really impactful to me as well. He's someone that has said a bunch of crazy things about a bunch of crazy topics throughout the years, but that line that he drove home was really impactful for me. So I would recommend, if everyone could, to check out that on londonlive.com, I think it is, whatever their website is for that. But on the topic at hand, this is something that I wish I would have submitted a t-shirt, because WikiLeaks shop just did a brand new run of shirts where they held a contest for everybody, and the theme was courage is contagious. And one of the things that I want people to kind of take away is that courage is way more contagious than the coronavirus. That one act, because the way Julian said it is, there is no heroes. There's just single heroic actions that can be done by multiple people. And right now we need these individual heroic actions, because I personally don't think anybody's coming to save us from this, that it's up to us to find a way individually and collectively to save ourselves in a decentralized manner that doesn't rely on state power. But just remember in your daily passings that courage is way more contagious than the coronavirus, and that we need to build community 10 feet apart from each other at this point.
Thank you, Andrew. I would like to remind everybody that there are several events going on around the world later on today and tomorrow, depending on which part of the world you're in. They're all for the 11th. There's some links on the Support Assange page, and if anybody has any others that aren't there, please send them through. There's going to be some amazing speakers. The one in the US has got Daniel Ellsberg, along with a bunch of other people, as the UK one has Christian Herafsson with a bunch of other people. And I think the New Zealanders have got a good one coming up at 7 o'clock their time tonight, which, depending on where you are, you're going to have to work out what that time is in your location. Look, it's been very inspiring, despite our early hiccups at the thing. We lost a lot of interested participants with that loss of that link, but thank you all for being able to participate today. And thank you all for putting forward your ideas. And of course, if you have anything that you want to share, send it to the SORC Facebook page, that's at ASWC Sydney, or to our email, which is info.sorcsydney@gmail.com. And we will make sure we share that with our networks and so on.